Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Good afternoon, everybody. What's happening? This your girl Tiffany. I'm here live in effect. Today, I want to get on the topic about G's Bend, Alabama, and the quilts of G's Bend. All right. So G's Bend, Alabama, which is also known as Boykin, Alabama, is a city that's located in it's a city that is predominantly African American, right? It's pretty much African American community. But what makes it much significant is the quilts. So for those who don't know about quilting, making blankets and cloths and things like that. So the women of G's Bend have made a contribution to the struggles, and the quilts, the patterns have significant meanings on it. So just think of it like the kente cloth. The kente cloth and the patterns on it has significant meanings. So that's the same way with the quilts in G's Bend. So I have information that will be in usage. I have a video that I would like to share. Okay. So it's a documentary. I want to share a piece of that documentary. And so that's all I have for today. Yeah, so that's all I'm gonna be talking about is G Bends and the quilts. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Make sure you share the video, hit the notification bell, all that great stuff, like the channel, all that good stuff. And if you see my Cash App on the bottom of the screen, if you want to go ahead and, send a little donation or whatever you want to do, that's on you. It's right there. All right. So let me go ahead and get started with this. Okay, let's see. Yeah. All right, so here it is. So Boykin, Alabama. So Boykin, Alabama, also known as G's Bend, is an African-American majority community census-designated place in a large bend of the Alabama River in Wilcox County, Alabama. As of the 2010 census, its population was 275. The Boykin Post Office was established in the community in 1949 and remains active, serving the 36723 zip code. Okay. G's Bend was named for Joseph G., an early large landowner from Halifax County, North Carolina, who settled here in 1816. G brought 18 African American slaves with him and established a cotton plantation with the Bend. All right, so, and it goes into the early history. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this. This comes from the encyclopedia of alabama.org. It says known officially since 1949 as the town of Boykin. The community of G's Bend is situated in Wilcox County in the West Alabama Black Belt. Today, approximately 750 people, mostly descendant of enslaved African Americans, live in the community on the banks of the Alabama River. Although beset by the same poverty and economic underdevelopment that characterize other sections of Western Alabama, G's Bend has demonstrated a persistent cultural wealth in the vibrant folk art of its quilt makers, whose work has gained national attention and critical acclaim. All right. So it goes on to say early inhabitants of Alabama tended to create communities along the many waterways of the state, and thus G. Bend's location is typical of many Alabama settlement. Joseph G., a large landowner from Halifax County, North Carolina, settled in 1816 on the north side of a large bend in the Alabama River near what would become the northeastern border of Wilcox County. He brought 18 enslaved blacks with him and established a cotton plantation. When he died, he left 47 slaves and his estate to two of his nephews. Sterling and Charles G. In 1845, the G's brothers sold the plantation to a relative, Mark H. Petaway, and the Petaway family name remains prominent in the Wilcox County. After emancipation, free blacks who stayed on a plantation worked as sharecroppers and tenant farmers. The Petaway family held the land until 1895 when they sold it to Adrian Sebastian Van de Graaf, an attorney from Tuscaloosa who operated the plantation as an absentee landowner. All right. So far what we know, the name G. Benz come from a guy named Joseph G., who was a slave owner and who brought 18 African Americans on the plantation. He had the little plantation that he ended up giving it over to his nephew, right? Well, his estate became part of his nephew's. It's, they took over the plantation once he had passed away. Then they end up selling it to the relative, and then it's been sold again to somebody who was a attorney who was an absentee landowner. So far that's the history. It was a cotton plantation. All right, so it went from a cotton plantation to being a city. That's what we know. So let's see what else we can find. So the 1930s was a period of significant change in G's Bend. A local merchant who had extended credit to the residents of the town died, and his family demanded immediate payment of all debts owed to him. Families watched as all their food, animals, tools, and seed were taken from them. Members of the community might have perished, but for rations distributed by the Red Cross and decision by the Van de Graaf family to waive rents. In 1937, the Van de Graaf family sold their land to the federal government, and the Farm Security Administration established G's Bend Farm Incorporation, a project of a cooperative program designated to sustain the inhabitants. The government built houses, subdivided the property, and sold tracts of land to local families. For the first time, giving the African American population control of the land they worked. During this period, the community also became the subject of several FSA sponsored photographers, including Marilyn Post Woolcott and Arthur Rosenstein. All right, so I'm gonna get into the story about the quilters, and what's the significant meanings behind them. All right. So the quilts of G's Bend are quilts created by a group of women and their ancestors who lived or have lived in the isolated African American hamlet of G's Bend, Alabama. Along the Alabama River, the quilts of G's Bend are among the most important African American visual and cultural contributions to the history of art within the United States. Alonzia Petaway, Anna Mae Young, and Mary Lee Bendoff are among some of the most notable quilters from G's Bend. Many of the residents of the community can trace their ancestry back to slaves from the Petaway plantation. Alonza Petaway can recall her grandmother's story of her ancestors, specifically of Dana Miller, who was brought to the United States by a slave ship in 1859. All right. All right, so let's go down to where it says the government sold tracts of land to the families of the Bend, thus giving the Native and African American population control over the land, which at the time was still rare. The community of G's Bend was also the subject of several Farm Security Administration photographers like Dorothea Lange During the latter half of the Great Depression, the inhabitants of the area faced challenges as farming practices became increasingly mechanicalized, and consequently, a large portion of the community left. However, many inhabitants of the community stayed. In 1949, a U.S. post office was established in Gee's Bend. In 1962, the ferry service, one of the only access into Gee's Bend, was eliminated, contributing to the community's isolation. Among other effects, this hindered residents' ability to register to vote. Ferry service was not restored until 2006. From the 1960s onward, the community of Gee's Bend, as well as the Freedom Quilting Bee in nearby Alberta, gained attention for the production of their quilts. Folk art collector, historian, and curator William Arnott brought further attention to this artistic production with his Souls Grown Deep Foundation in Atlanta, Georgia, as he helped organize many expeditions which featured their art. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. visited the area. All right, so what is the Freedom Quilting Bee? All right, so according to the information, the Freedom Quilting Bee was a quilting cooperative based in Rehoboth, Alabama, that operated from 1966 to 2012. Originally begun by African American women as a way to generate income, some of the bee's quilts were displayed in Smithsonian Institution. The Freedom Quilting Bee was a quilting cooperative with members located throughout the Black Belt of Alabama. Black women created the cooperative in 1966 as a way to generate income for their families. The women began selling their quilts at the suggestion of Father Francis X. Walter, a priest who was returning to the area as part of the Selma Interreligious Project. He received a $700 grant and traveled through the Black Belt looking for quilts to present at an auction. All right. After the first auction in New York City, the quilts gained critical acclaim and popularity, promoting the craftswomen to organize an official quilting cooperative. The Freedom Quilting Bee, as an alternative economics organization, is part of a history of collective economic work of Black Americans. These alternative economics were used raise the social economic status of poor Black communities. During the late 1960s and 1970s, the cooperative changed its operation to increase profits through a more mass market model. New York Stanley Selinga was hired as the industrial development consultant. Working for just travel expenses, he brought their quilts to New York City and helped the cooperative make deals with Bloomingdale's and Sears. Memberships in the Freedom Quilting Bee dwindled in the 1990s, and the community space they used was damaged by weather. In 2012, a year after the last original board member died, the Bee officially closed. Commonly confused with the Quilters of G. Benz, the Freedom Quilting Bee was a separate organization with a similar mission and overlapping membership. All right. All right, so now let's get back down to the information about the quilts. All right, so as you can see down here, it says the quilting tradition in Gee's Bend go back beyond the 19th century and may have influenced in part by pattern Native American textile and African textile. African American women pieced together strips of cloth to make bed covers. Throughout the postbellum years and into the 20th century, Gee's Bend women made quilts to keep themselves and their children warm in unheated shacks that lacked running water, telephones, and electricity. Along the way, they developed a distinctive style noted for its lively improvisations and geometric simplicity. Many of the quilts are a departure from classical quilt making, bringing to mind a minimalistic quality. This could also have been influenced by the isolation of their location, which necessitate using whatever materials were on hand, often recycling from old clothing and textile. So, going back to where it talks about geometric simplicity. All right, so mathematics is always important. All right, it's the most important aspect of science. So, reason why I say that is because we're using science, math, and technology every single day without even knowing it. We're using it a lot. Even when kids are playing hopscotch, double dutch, all of that, that's mathematics. Because you counting how many times you can jump. You count how many times you can mark your foot on the numbers. Okay. So you're dealing with patterns, you're dealing with frequency. All right, you're dealing with numbers. So when you're making quilts, even with that, you're dealing with math because you're dealing with numbers. If you think about it, it goes back to the concept about the African fraticals. So for those who don't know about the African fraticals, that's basically dealing with the patterns and the sequence of numbers during the African tradition in the African time period. Okay, so that's what African fratical is, just dealing with the patterns and numbers of a symbol object. All right, so with that being said, when individual that's making things such as blankets, pillows, or whatnot, and they use little patterns on there, they're using mathematics. And that's that. So I want to go ahead and finish. Many of the quilts are a departure from classical quilt making, bringing to mind a minimalist quality. This could have been influenced by the isolation of their location, which necessitate using whatever materials were on hand, often recycling from old clothing textile. All right, and so it goes on to say the quilts have been exhibited at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Indianapolis Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Tacoma Art Museum, and the Whitney Museum of Art, American Art, among others. The reception of the work has been mostly positive, as Aleva Wardloff, curator of modern and contemporary art at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, wrote, the compositions of these quilts contrast dramatically with the ordered regularity associated with many styles of Euro-American quilt making. There's a brilliant improvisational range of approaches to composition that is more often associated with the inventiveness and power of the leading 20th century abstract patterns than it is with textile making. So again, each of these quilts had abstract meaning to it. All right, it's symbolized with those patterns. So those quilts could mean something about a loved one. It could mean something about a tragic event that took place. It could mean anything. All right, so in 2003, 50 quilt makers founded the Gee's Bend Collective, which is owned and operated by the women of Gee's Bend. Every quilt sold by the Gee's Bend Quilt Collective is unique and individually produced. In recent years, members of the collective have traveled nationwide to talk about Gee's Bend history and their art. Many of the ladies have become well known for their wit, engaging personality, and in some cases, singing abilities. In 2015, G's band quilter Mary Lee Bandolph, Lucy Mingo, and Loretta Petaway were joint recipients of a National Heritage Fellowship awarded by the National Endowment for the Arts, which is the United States government highest honor in the folk and traditional arts. All right. So, with that being said, if you want to check out more information, you can look up Encyclopedia of Alabama about G's band and the quilts, right? And here are the residents, and here are the women that are making the quilts over here to my left. Additional resources. All right, there we go. Okay, so, and here's a journal called Discovering the Quilts of G's Band by Anna C. Chave, the Journal of Modern Craft, all right, which was written in 2008. So you can go ahead and check out this journal, which goes in more depth about the quilt and the art and the significant meanings of it. And as a matter of fact, here's the book right here. I actually got the book. So here's the book about the quilts of G's band. All right. So these are the quilts. And peace to the brother in chat. Peace, Sir 00. All right, here are the quilts. I'm gonna go down here and find the introduction. Hold on. I think I skipped the intro. All right, so here's the introduction, the quilts of G's band. And right here it says the quilts of G's band present the genius of a group of exceptional women who, for well over a century, have created distinctive works of art for their homes and families. Hailing from one small rural Black community in Alabama with a population of about 700, these women have produced hundreds of quilt masterpieces that we know about, dating from the mid-1920s to the present. The textile artists of G's band are the inheritors of a tradition that undoubtedly goes back many generations. Though earlier examples of their community's quilt are lost, the G's band's quilts also represent only a portion of the rich tradition of African American quilt making in the South, but they are in a league by themselves. Few other places can boast the density of G's band artistic achievement, which is the result both of geographical isolation and unusual degree of cultural continuity. In few other places can we find surviving examples of work by 3 and sometimes 4 generations of women in the same family, or trace the lineage of different community quilting groups. And in few places can we find so many quilts with so much flair, peace, and bold, improvision geometrics from salvage work, clothes and dresses, concepts, and fabric samples. The quilts of G's band present a particular place of its people who have created a body of art so rich in its content and so remarkable in its so remarkable in its execution that it now enhances dramatically the American cultural landscape. All right. So, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate you always coming in, showing your support. I really do. That really means a lot to me. So thank you, brother. So yeah, this book here, if you want to check out, you can go to archive.org, the Quilts of G's Ben, and it goes into more information and more history in the background and great stuff like that. So I don't really have the time to read into it, but you can always look it up for yourself. All right. All right. So I'm going to return that. All right. And then I want to go ahead and play this little documentary film. See if I can. All right. I'm going to go ahead and play this documentary. It's called Quilt Makers of G's Ben. And I'm not going to play too much of it. I'm probably going to play about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And that's about it. So I'm going to let the women tell their story because they can tell it better than me. All right.
This project is important to me personally as an African American woman. People are moved, they cry, they want to know the women.
He ain't thought about no artists for quilts, but it came to be so. And I know it's so, because I done see them on the wall in the museum. I know it's so. And that make it so beautiful to see these old quilts from the wall. Bring memories back to me.
It is going to change art history.
I fell in love with the art. It's all leftover things that have been discarded by others. The way the artists, have been discarded by society. And they take these discarded pieces and give them new and transcendent life.
They was started singing that song by Swing Low Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home. Said they were ready to go home. They had such a hard time, they were ready to go home. They were singing that song by Swing Low Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home.
When they say, well, we're going to see our quilt, I was expecting to see the new quilt. But when I walked in and saw all these old quilts, it brought back the memory of the hard time, brought back the struggle, the pain, the night that I was awake from being hungry. It brought all that back. And I was thankful that I had the opportunity to go and see all this history from G's Ben, and knowing that I was part of it. And I was walking with the peoples that had the quilt hanging in the museum. It was awesome. Awesome.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Father.
AFS recording number 5090.
It's raining down here on the rainbow. It's raining down here on the rainbow. It's raining down here on the rainbow. Mama, it's coming in now. It's coming down here on the rainbow. It's coming down here on the rainbow. It's coming down here on the
family came to G Bend by Grandmama Donna came from Africa in 1859. She was sold and bought with a dime. But her mother and her brother went another direction. They separate them. They were not together, and she never did get a chance to see her mama and her brother and her dad anymore because she came this way. And I guess the other went to North Carolina somewhere in Wick, but she never did get a chance to see him anymore. My daddy, too. He was sold to the master, and he was early in the beginning, but he had to go into this main name, what was over him, and he was a pedant. And that, the way he said, he began in Jesus' being.
It's a misconception, though, that all petways are related. They're not at all. The plantation owner, at some point, it was decided that all the black people here that worked here, slaves, ex-slaves, had to take the name of the plantation owner, Petway. So that's how the petways got started. And most of the community at that time was named Petway. Now still about half the communities petways. We're going to go over to the site of the old plantation house, the Petway Plantation House, which was built in the 19th century. It doesn't stand anymore. It was torn down by the government in the 40s. It was considered a symbol of the old plantation life, so they had it torn down. The last inhabitant of the plantation house was a man named John Miller, who was the son of a slave named Dinah, who was the great grandmother of Arlanzia Petway. So John Henry Miller, was Arlanzia's great uncle. Okay, now we'll have to find a good entry into these woods. It's grown up a great deal since I was here. So the plantation was in this area, right back in these woods. And don't see, let's go on along the road and see what we can find. We can give this a shot. If you get enough footage, you might be able to do another Blair Witch project down this. Help yourself. You want me to go first, or you want to go first? Huh? Okay. I think I see what we're looking for, so this was not as bad as I thought. There's the biggest of the remaining tombstones. It's really more of a monument. Mark Petway is the man who bought this plantation in the 19th century from his cousin, whose name was Joseph G., who's the one who founded the home. Mark was the one that came down, if you know the story, he came down from North Carolina with 100 slaves who walked all the way. Legend had it that the only one he allowed to ride was the cook. That's the original group of slaves that formed the large plantation here in Gee's Bend. There's been very few people who've moved into here from other areas. There are a few, but for the most part, the community is occupied today by descendants of the original slaves, almost all of them. So this is Solomon, son of Mark Petway. So this is the sister of the Solomon Petway that we just saw, in memory of Marina, daughter of Mark and Marina Petway, born in Halifax County, North Carolina, married to John E. Jones. Okay, this side says sacred to the memory of Willie C., daughter of Mark H. and Marina C. Petway. So this is the younger sister of Marina on the other side. Married John E. Jones. I think that's the same man that married young Marina. So we've got 2 daughters and a son who are the children of the original plantation owner, Mark Petway, who gave his name to every family down here, which is why there are so many Petways. His 3 children all died at very young ages, 2 of whom, after being married for 1 year to John E. Jones. It's very suspicious. The land changed hands a few times over the next 100 years, well, up until the time of the Roosevelt administration. Gee's Bend had a period of time in which it really did hit rock bottom. In the 30s, all the people here were heavily indebted to a family who loaned money. They called it advancing. And so everyone had been advanced money to buy seeds and to buy whatever they needed. When the price of cotton down here dropped from, down here and everywhere, dropped from 40 cents a pound to a nickel a pound, and people were making their entire income from cotton farming and a little bit of produce, there was just no way to make it at that point. The man who had advanced them all died, and his wife and the creditors decided, let's just call in the debts. And they came over here with an army, basically, of horseback riders who were black and white, who just swept through the community and took everything that wasn't nailed down.
And after about 8 o'clock, here come this man with this boogie. He coming on in there, and he went in there, and he got the little cone out the barn. He got a few sweet potatoes, and he had but one hog, and got the one hog, then he got the hog, and Mama had 3 or 4 hens, and a rooster or something you caught in the hen house. And she had got to the place she couldn't take it no more. And he just started to the hen house to get the hens and the rooster out there. When he started there, she picked up this long crooked ham hoe and told that man, if you go in my hen house to get my last hen, said, I'm going to cut your neck off with this hoe. And that time that man jumped in this bug and down that road he went. And that's how brave she was. The people didn't have anything because they broke up the people that year, and the Red Cross had to take over that year and start to feed the people.
The community was reduced to abject poverty, and like it had never had before. And the quilts from that period reflect that. If you know the history, then you can see it reflected in the art. The Roosevelt administration at that point had taken an interest in this area because it was determined to be the poorest area in the country. Wilcox County was the poorest county, and this community was the poorest community. There was no income. The land was purchased by the government and parceled out, and black people were allowed to actually buy and own land, and the government built them houses for a cheap price and with long, low interest mortgages.
One of the things that I've been most surprised at has been the international fame of this exhibition. I mean, I've been in museums since 1968, and I've never seen a phenomenon like this.
If you'd asked these women, are you artists? Until recently, they would have said no. We're just doing this because it comes naturally. So our definitions of artists and outsider artists and so on are thrown into question.
These quilts are important as contemporary art for several reasons. The first being that they represent a tradition that has been passed on for a number of generations in a very small area in America, Gee's Bend, Alabama. The quilts reflect the history of that area and of this country in their making. And it asks all of us about genius, and where does it reside?
I can twist straight. The head goes straight and then our cut is straight. B is telling us It was artwork. I ain't know nothing about man that thing and look wolf. You talking about art? He told me, yeah.
I never thought I would get honored and praised by the quilt. 10 or 12, 15 years ago, I didn't think this would happen. We were selling quilts, but we didn't think this would happen. Until Bill came along, he told us that we had artwork, and I didn't know what artwork was. Y'all have all this beautiful artwork here on y'all mattress and thing. He just go on the mattress and try to pull out the mattress, old quilts we have up under there. He said, this is.
All right, so that's one of the documentaries on the quilt makers of Gee's Bend, and what a beautiful history behind it. I mean, you can check out more. You can go on pbs.org and look up more information, and just type in the quilt makers of Gee's Bend. But that's very extraordinary. I'm a firm believer that home economics should be brought back into schools, because not just learn about taking care of bills and keeping your house clean and things like that, but learn how to do arts and crafts. And that's a form of arts and crafts right there. Making quilts. That's the earliest form of that. As a matter of fact, technology is nothing more than arts and crafts. That's all it is. It was done manually before there was industrial revolution, before there was digital programming. Everything was done manually. So it's about using creativity. And these women were creative enough to make a quilt to share the story of the timeline of their ancestors, to show the struggles of what it was like growing up here in the South. The struggles of poverty. So those quilts told many stories of generations that came along. So for those who may not understand why people do things they do, especially out here in the South, whether it be making quilts, singing Negro spiritual hymns, or believing in superstitious stuff, things like that, because, excuse me, oh, I was about to sneeze. Anyways, because that was a part of the tradition. That was a part of the storytelling. So when you come to what make the South different from the North and the West Coast is that the South is more cultural, especially when it comes to African Americans. It's very cultural. It has a lot of West African origins, right? It has a lot of West African tradition mixed in, especially when you go to places like Louisiana, New Orleans, or when you go to South Carolina to visit the Gullah Geechee tribe. From the peninsula of South Carolina all the way on down to where Jacksonville, Florida is at. So many rich history going on. Or when you go to various parts of Texas, you will find a lot of the African origin, the West African origin and tradition that's blended within. So this is what makes the South so unique from various parts of the states. I mean, the South just have the uniqueness. The food is very unique. One day, inshallah, or if the creator wills it so, I will do a video about soul food. and the history behind soul food. So many people want to make criticism about what we do here in the South without even understanding the origins of why we do it in the South. But going back to my point about home economics, yes, I am a big advocate of that. I believe that that is very important for a young person because, one day you may not have, one day you're not going to have your parents. You're not going to have your grandparents. So you got to be able to learn to do what you can for yourself. You got to be able to make some usage out of it. Even if that means that you got to use your creativity and make something and sell it, you have to. So that way you can learn ways of making income. I believe that it's very important to learn how to sew. Now, I don't know how to sew. Maybe one day I'll learn. But I believe that for somebody who want to learn how to sew, you need to learn how to do that. Learn how to cook. Learn how to clean. Learn how to wash. Yes, I believe in gender roles. I do. I believe that there should be a balance. I believe that women should be able to do certain things and men should be able to do certain things when it comes to household. All right? That's why I believe in, because that keeps the balance. If you got men doing one thing over here and the women doing other things over here, that keeps the balance. Because everybody can't do the same thing. Okay? Everybody can't do the same thing. Now, that doesn't take away that men should not learn how to cook or sew. They should. They should be able to learn how to cook, because when the woman's not there, for whatever reason, you should be able to get up and prep your own food. You should be able to know how to clean up your own house. You see what I'm saying? So you should be able to learn how to do all these things, but I think that there should be a balance in the relationship. There should be a balance in the household, because when you bring balance, you bring more balance in the community. So we should always go back and learn about our tradition, our ancestors' tradition, and how they brought ideas into existence and why these things are important. We should never just throw them away. We should never forget about them. And I think that's what's really happening with a lot of us. We forget about a lot of our tradition, and it's not really spoken about. So with that being the case, it gets to a point where many of us don't really know about where we come from or who our people were. So because of the fact that the information has been lost and has never been talked about, we become a lost people. And then if we really knew our history, we wouldn't have so many identity crises. Yes, I said identity crisis. You wouldn't have so many names going around. You wouldn't have so many people talking about they FBA and ADOS and Hebrew Israelites, Moors, and Nuwapians, and all these other different titles. They wouldn't have all these names. And I have nothing against those people. I have some against their ideology, but I don't have anything against the people, because I understand that they're lost. So we have to dig deep into this. And I'm gonna do the best I can to present more information as much as possible. It's so many I can't do all at once, but I'll do the best that I can to just put it on the forefront. The rest is on you. You do what you gotta do. You can either share it or you can discard it. It's on you. But you can't say that nobody ever exposed it to you, nobody ever taught the history, nobody ever showed it, nobody ever did anything. Because you were shown, but you decided on your own merit what you wanted to do. All right, but anyways, that's all that I have for today. That's all that I have for today. I hope everybody have a wonderful day on this beautiful Friday, what they call Black Friday. So, and anybody out there that's on that Black Friday stuff, please be safe. Don't be trying to hurt nobody. Don't be trying to stumble over everybody. But probably these stores are not really open like that either. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah, some of these stores probably not open like that either. So that's another thing. So but if they are open, please don't try to hurt nobody. Don't try to beat nobody up because you're trying to get a dang on flat screen TV that's on sale and you've been wanting it for the whole entire year. um, we know they giving away good discounts. Yes. And dang it. Maybe later on, we're gonna talk about the meaning of Black Friday. Because a lot of people seem to think that Black Friday had something to do with slaves. And it had nothing to do with that. It's something totally different. It had something to do with marketing. It had something to do with the business. It had nothing to do with the slaves, okay? It had something to do with businesses being able to get a tax write-off, all right? Being able to have a bigger sale so they can get rid of all their items and products and have new inventories coming in. That's what it's really about. It's about marketing. It's dealing with the economics. It's not dealing with the slaves. All right. So maybe later on tonight I will do that. I will dig up some information about that and show proof and all that great stuff. But until then, you guys have a wonderful day, a wonderful afternoon. Please take it easy. Watch out for this pandemic. And I will reconnect with you all later. All right. Thank you. May peace and power elevation be to all of you.